Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour then, we will see what is on the newspapers with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the Guido Fawkes reporter Tom Harwood. Welcome to both of you, great to see you. So let's take a look, shall we, at the front pages, starting with the Eye, which chooses to spotlight people on the honours list who aren't household names, calling them ordinary heroes. Daily Express features a photograph of Olivia Newton-John, who's been awarded a New Year honour, but its main headline claims a new Brexit row has ignited after a top EU bureaucrat threatened to extend the UK's transition out of the EU. Olivia Newton-John also featuring on the front page of The Guardian. It leads with its interview with Tom Watson, who said he left Parliament because of the brutality and hostility within the Labour Party. Meanwhile, The Times focuses on the controversial Honours Award given to the former Director of Public Prosecutions, Alison Saunders, who was given a damehood. The Mirror reports that Melanie Panayiotou, the sister of the late singer George Michael, has herself died on the 3rd anniversary of her brother's passing. The Sun reports that Ms Panayiotou was found in her North London home by her sister, who was visiting. That story is also on the front page of the Daily Star. To the Telegraph now, Princess Anne says the introduction of health and safety rules in sport could actually put more children at harm. Obesity among middle-aged people is increasing demand on the NHS to treat conditions such as cancer, diabetes and heart disease. That's the lead for the Mail. And the Financial Times suggests that a predicted tie-up between Amazon and the takeaway delivery service Deliveroo is now unlikely to happen. So let's talk more. Susie Boniface, Tom Harwood are here. To the honours we go. New Year honours list. The Times going on a former DPP who gets a damehood.
Yep, Alison Saunders, who resigned after the scandals about disclosure in various sexual offence court cases, and was normally, it's accepted for DPPs that is automatically almost, and therefore wrongly, but automatically when you leave the post you should be getting some kind of honour, and it didn't happen. She's been overlooked in 2 honours lists, and here she is finally managed to get her damehood. Hurrah for her. I don't know what the rest of us are supposed to make of it, frankly.
We always seem to seek the controversy, do we not, in these honours? Should we not just let people celebrate being recognised for the work that they do?
Well, I'm not sure it's being recognised for the work that you do if every single person who holds your post gets an honour. It seems like you're not being honoured for your own deeds at all. And there are so many cases in this honours list, whether it's the people who were behind the failed Brexit deal, including the undemocratic backstop, whether it's the former chief medical officer, or the current chief medical officer who's behind a lot of nanny state interventionist policies. All these people who don't seem to really have contributed all that much to society seem to be getting honours just simply for the positions that they hold and their proximity to power, and that doesn't seem particularly right.
Or some of the things as well that we might think of as negative about someone, their position on Brexit or what they did or didn't do in their job. There's also other things that they've done. I mean, Dame Sally Davies, who inexplicably to me has been made a dame twice over. She was already a dame and now she's been made a slightly better class of dame. She has smashed glass ceilings. She has become the first woman to become chief medical officer. She's been named the first female master at Trinity College, Cambridge. She's done lots of drive for sex across universities. There are things they do in other aspects of their job, and perhaps as a result of their position.
And surely you wouldn't get that job in the first place if you weren't the best or near the best in your field.
One would hope not,
but
although there are so many examples.
Surely the job in itself is quite good, and we shouldn't be sort of adding tinsel and cherries on the top of quite high-powered jobs just because they're in those jobs.
What's the point of the whole New Year's honours list if you say no tinsel?
Well, perhaps the front page of the Eye will tell us about that.
Yeah, let's go to the Eye then. The ordinary heroes, as they put it. I mean, some of these people are actually quite well known, aren't they? Harry Blinge there, but who are these people? Because there's nearly 1,000 names on this list.
Absolutely, and 3/4 of the names on the list are these so-called ordinary heroes, these sort of people from communities who have been proposed by other members of the community for doing particular work that's not perhaps front-page news, that doesn't get talked about in press previews every single day. And some of these people we will have heard of and are quite humble, really, in and of themselves. Harry Blinge is a particular example who made headlines a little while ago for saying when he fought on the D-Day beaches, he didn't think of himself as a hero. He's not a hero in his mind, but clearly in amongst his peers and the work that he's done to raise money to build a memorial to the D-Day landings, has been recognised here, and so many other people who've done their own little bit in their own communities.
My problem with this is that only 3/4 of the people on this list are normal people, in quote marks. And obviously, they're all normal in some regard. They all have to go to the toilet like the rest of us. But if you already have a position, perhaps as a result of being elected or as a result of being a chief medical officer or a dean of a university or something, you already have a lot of accolades, a fair bit of wealth to compensate for the stress and the position that you're in, and recognition from the public for the work that you have done. I don't think you need the extra tinsel, like Tom says, but why do we need anyone to be a dame or a peer or a sir who is not someone who is nominated by their community? Why is it people who are nominated by politicians, perhaps for a,
So you're complaining about political patronage as something that still exists in modern society? It seems
to be patronage, and it seems to be that there is still a class system within the honours, and that if you're a normal Joe, you might get a CBE or an OBE or a bit of a pat on the head. You're never going to get elevated.
But we do need to differentiate between the sort of political advisors and the civil servants who seem to be getting honours just for doing the job that they're supposed to do in the first place, and people like Elton John who've gone above and beyond what they would have to do in their position. I mean, if you're a rich and famous singer-songwriter, you don't necessarily have to go that extra mile and do all that charity work to get a lot of recognition. And people like Elton John, people like some of the more famous names, aren't just there because they're famous. They're there because they've done something quite extraordinary. And I think that's
so
right.
Does that mean sporting heroes shouldn't get honours? Because obviously the England men's cricket team have been honoured this time, haven't they? Quite. Are you saying they're just doing their job?
Well,
do you have to do something beyond your job to get
I think probably that's right, and it seems that a lot of cricketing people seem to have been mentioned in this list because it was mainly drawn up by under Theresa May's administration, and obviously she's a big cricket fan. And I'm not sure that the system of honours should just go to what sort of people the Prime Minister happens to like more than
there should be, and obviously this comes through committees in the Cabinet Office. It's supposed to be done at arm's length. It isn't. It's just not at arm's length from the politicians. The whole process should be overseen by a committee of...
Oh, no, not more civil servants. They'll just give themselves all the honours.
Ordinary people, is what I said.
Right.
A committee of people who are not to do with Whitehall, who are not to do with the establishment or the system or any of this, what we have going on, and who are, overlooking and regarding and considering people who are nominated by their own communities. And 100% of the honours should go to people who are nominated by the people who have been benefiting from that person's hard work. Whether it's Elton John or whether it's the Lollipop Lady, they should be nominated by members of the public and decided on by members of the public.
It's so complicated. I mean, I printed off the list, and it was kind of that thick. Apologies for paper lovers everywhere, but I mean, there's dames and there's knighthoods and there's different knighthoods. It's a complicated process, isn't it?
But it's quite magical. That's what's quite nice about the whole royal system, right? That's kind of special about this country, and it would be a shame to lose.
Yeah, and those people who do get honours and they get to go to the palace and to meet one of the royals and to have their honour given to them, it's one of the best days in their lives and the proudest days for their mums and so on. They shouldn't be knocking that, but I just think it should be something that the public nominate and control and are in charge of.
Well, in a complex system, the newspaper simplifies. So in midwinter, they choose Summer Lovin and Olivia Newton-John, don't they? Front page of the Daily Telegraph, she's on. But, I mean, she's the picture we've seen most on the front pages. But nothing for Nigel Farage and something for Ian Duncan-Smith, former Conservative Party leader, but also controversially for some people, the architect of universal credit.
Yes, and remember there were long drawn-out battles about getting his ministry to release the figures of people who had died while on sanctions for his benefit that he had introduced, and he didn't want to make those things public. So there are many, many people who have suffered as a result of, or believe they have suffered as a result of Ian Duncan-Smith's work. But will not be very happy about that.
I think it's just so erroneous to say as a result of universal credit there has been... I mean, we need to not look at this in isolation and look at it in context of the terrible system that trapped people on benefits before 2010. The myriad complicated system that didn't work for so many people. It was right that that went. Everyone agreed that that should go. There was cross-party support for universal credit. And sadly, I mean, the reason why Ian Duncan-Smith resigned in 2016 was because it was the Treasury that started nitpicking away at the system that was actually not designed to save money. It was designed to help people move on and up and exit.
People were starving on that benefit before that point. point.
And the
Starving to
principle of universal credit, which is one of the things that Ian Duncan Smith is rightly recognised for, is a good one and a sound one. But also his huge work with the Centre for Social Justice that he set up is another reason why he's getting it. It's not just his time in government, it's all of the work that he's done outside of government in terms of furthering social justice in this country that is rightly recognised here.
OK. You picked the Telegraph, in fact, for the story about Princess Anne attacking risky health and safety culture. What's been said?
Yeah, at first glance, it's Princess Anne being brusque in the way that we might expect Princess Anne to be, going health and safety, it's not fair. And she's sort of, she's very cross that some areas of Britain are being condemned as disadvantaged because it helps charities obtain funding for those areas and so on. But if you dive into the interview, which she's given to one of the Telegraph supplements because of she's doing some work that supports one of the Telegraph's chosen charities, she says, if you don't allow children to assess their own risk-taking abilities, you don't let the child decide if it's safe to do the thing they're doing, then they don't learn to judge what's safe and what's not. And then because they're told there's been a risk assessment or we've judged this safe, they go and do it when they don't have the skills to be safe in that situation, and then they are in trouble. So she's making a perfectly common sense, reasonable point that you'd expect someone who's had a lot of falls off horses to be able to make and has been a mother of children and seen them do the same thing. But it's kind of being presented as a bit more, and Princess Anne being a bit gung-ho.
Does it list any examples specifically?
Yes. As a patron of the Scottish Rugby Union,
right,
she mentions when Scottish Rugby mandated that children had to wear pads for their rugby games, and actually injuries went up. Because it turns out if you cover everything in cotton wool, people are more likely to run each other harder, and there were more injuries as a result. So this sort of intervention very often has consequences that were totally unintended. And it seems to be a very sensible point that she's making here, although I think we should all be a bit wary of when royals try to get involved in politics. It rarely goes well.
Or telling other people what's risky and what's not.
Yeah, well, you don't know, you never know what to do. Let's go to the prospects of a cabinet reshuffle come the new year.
Yep, possibly Geoffrey Cox, who people might remember as the booming baritone who defended Theresa May and her Brexit deal in Parliament so much, will be for the chop. Apparently he's going to...
Hold on, he's the one that introduced, I thought, Boris Johnson as part of his leadership bid. He did in that first leadership event. That's quite a loyal thing to do.
Perhaps he'll become Lord. Something.
Well, he has been known in the last few weeks to be one of the more dissenting voices within Cabinet. And now that Boris Johnson has achieved the largest majority for any Conservative Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher, he has a lot of power to sort of decide how things should go.
Dissenting
and in a
on what, then?
On particularly issues with regard to leaving the European Union. There was an issue about lower courts and whether they should overrule EU law during complicated things. But what's crucial here is that the Cabinet is going to be slimmed down. There are going to be fewer Cabinet ministers and fewer departments, and obviously some people are going to be lost in that process.
Sorry, I
interrupted you. Which will mean that you get lots more mega departments, if you like, with one person at the top of it, so more potential perhaps for things to go horribly wrong if they're not very good at managing their department. We're talking as well about possibility of Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Rishi Sunak, who's in line for promotion to one of these mega economics departments, perhaps prisons and so on being taken away from the Justice Department, taken back to the Home Office, more fiddling about with some Home Office issues. And it's all really much a case of now Boris Johnson's in power and now he's got through those first few months and he's got his Brexit deal over the line. Now is the case of what's he going to build and how is he going to go forward. Geoffrey Cox, is interesting to know, is one of those who in the previous administration was saying, look, some of the things you are talking about with Brexit would be illegal under international law and under British law. And this is the kind of thing where they're saying here, well, he's not a team player, he's not quite on our side. So although he may be an experienced QC, they've decided they don't need his services.
Well, this is already being dubbed by the Mail as a potential Valentine's Day massacre. It will come in mid-February and up to a third of Cabinet ministers could lose their jobs. And it will be one of the biggest restructurings of Whitehall, and it will follow through what is going to be a much more fundamental reorganisation of the civil service, creating new elements of the civil service and creating them away from London in the regions and places that are now trying to become the new Tory heartlands. These are going to be new departments that are centred around rebalancing the economic growth of this country. And it will be very interesting to see how far-reaching this very widely trailed reshuffle will be.
And how many jobs there actually are in the regions as a result.
Yes, indeed so. And your quiz question for the night is how many Cabinet posts, how many people have disappeared from the Cabinet after the election anyway?
Well, I mean, if we're including Nicky Morgan, who's sort of
Yes,
is still in the cabinet
in again.
reshuffle. I mean, so it's broadly the same, apart from the Welsh Secretary Alan Kearns, who resigned
resign,
on the first day of the campaign, was it? So other than that, it's exactly the same.
OK, we will see what happens, certainly, but we'll look out for that in mid-Feb. Plenty more still to come, including divisions too within the Labour Party. Talk about those in just a couple of minutes' time. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me this evening, Susie Boniface and Tom Harwood. Welcome back to both of you. Tom Watson, big interview in The Guardian, but also in The Times. Corbyn almost quit after he lost support of MPs. Do you remember those extraordinary days where the cabinet was shadow cabinet all resigning?
Yeah, back when there was a huge no confidence vote, 172 to 40, I think, something like that, and he considered going. Then a year into his leadership, and who knows what may or may not be any different now as a result, if that was the case. Tom Watson says that he voted for Owen Smith as
Shock.
it's the only opponent that was there in the room at the time, and it was just kind of felt that there was lots of talk about how with McCluskey and Watson and Corbyn about how you can go and what you can do, and it was just basically the factionalism and the idea that we don't need to go now. This is going to cause too much upset if he goes now. He needs to stay there. It was always the people around Corbyn that kept him in place. Corbyn himself was more reluctant in the job and could probably have left a fair bit sooner. It's the people around him who kind of forced him and wedged him and kept him in post.
But it was also
for a long time.
the change in how you get a Labour leader under Ed Miliband that meant that Labour MPs never really had the power to unseat him, did they? And that's still the case now.
Well, there was always this massive conflict between Parliament and the party.
Yes.
And it almost in a funny way, in an analogous way to Brexit, where you had a democratic mandate from the wider populace that was opposed by people in Parliament. And similarly, in the Labour Party, you had that tension. But talking to any moderate Labour MP, basically, they think they moved too early. Immediately after Brexit, they panicked in that week after the 23rd of June 2016. Suddenly, you had all of those resignations and they were thrown into a leadership contest before they were really organised, before they even had a settled-upon candidate. You had battling in between moderates, whether it was Angela Smith or Angela Eagle or Owen Smith, trying to become that unity opposition force. But yes, it was always those people around Jeremy Corbyn, particularly Seamus Milne, who was sort of bolstering him there in place and keeping him alive. I mean, it's interesting. John Lansman, the founder of Momentum, has latterly said that the first thing that Jeremy Corbyn said when he got nominated to run for the leader of the Labour Party, he said, "You'd better make effing sure I don't win." And he said that to John Lansman, but it was always about more than Corbyn. It was that Corbyn project that was managed by so many other people, and they're trying to keep alive today.
So what happens now with the 500,000 Labour supporters who mainly supported Jeremy Corbyn? Will they believe that a non-Corbynista type leader is now what is required or not?
It's whether or not, that factionalism, that tribalism, which was so set upon the Corbyn project, whether that has actually had the scales fall from its eyes and it can see reality now. What Watson has tried to do in this interview is to be one of those moderates who's trying to frame the debate, to be talking about the big ideas, not about whether it's this Corbynista or that Corbynista, trying to move the debate on and say, is it this kind of party we want or a party that's actually in power? And he's saying here, look, it's the greatest betrayal, the ultimate betrayal of working class people is to not take power when you can. And there have been so many opportunities for either party to be able to really properly shoe the other one in the past 4 years. And Labour have definitely had some opportunities ever since 2010 and had lots of open goals, and it's never quite managed to get the ball in the back of the net.
Two quick stories as we draw to a finish. First of all, free parking charges, the Conservatives delivering on a promise, but now hospitals going, where's the money going to come from?
Well, exactly. This is a popular policy out in the country, but looking at it in terms of raw economics, it's not a very good policy. If you have to spend more on free parking and all of the problems that causes in terms of congestion and everything, that costs money. And that's money that is being spent on the NHS that is being spent on car parking rather than new machinery, new wards, new beds.
I thought that the money tap was turned on now, and all of this could just be dealt with by some other budget.
Well, it's still,
billions,
there's
like the billions and billions.
Well, there's
specific. Going to rain down.
The thing about the Conservative manifesto is it was costed. There were specific pledges with specific money going in. I mean, we heard constantly about the numbers of new hospitals, the numbers of new nurses. These are things that are very specific, and obviously if you spend more on free parking... Well, we'll see in 5 years. But if you spend more on free parking, which actually the more affluent people drive to hospitals, poorer people tend to take buses to hospitals, and this is not particularly the best way to spend money, but they're doing it.
OK, and in 10 seconds, the house that won't sell, blame Harry Potter or Voldemort.
Yes, the poor lady who lives in a house that became Lord Voldemort's house. She's been trying to sell it, and for some reason, that the estate agent can't find anybody who's interested and also speaks snake to live there. So she's struggling and running it as a PMP.
The saddest thing about this story is they didn't even know their house would be in the film. Oh. They discovered it when they went to the cinema, that the exterior of the house was used in the
permission, so.
We've run out of time. Tom, Susie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, with us tonight for the press preview are the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the Guido Fawkes reporter Tom Harwood. Very good to see you both. Let's crack on with the New Year's honours, shall we? Not perhaps making quite as many of the newspapers as we've seen in previous years, but what are the headlines that you've noticed so far?
Well, it's always very interesting that the Eye always does a very different kind of display to the other newspapers. So the front page of the Eye is about the quotes, ordinary people who've done something extremely extraordinary, actually, in order to get an honour. So you have the likes of Rhiannon Mannings, who set up a charity to help bereaved families after she lost her own baby son and husband within days of each other. Hattie Hassan, who founded a network of female plumbers and encouraged more women into the trades. Georgie Maureen Hughes, who fostered 39 people. Yewande Akinola, who's an engineer who's tackling climate change through advanced green technology. The Normandy veteran, Harry Billinge, who people may have heard of, who's raised more than £25,000 to build a national memorial for his D-Day comrades and has appeared on various news programmes. And Nicolette Peel is a midwife who launched a charity to support women diagnosed with cancer during their pregnancy. These are the people who have an actual impact that really tells on other people's lives, and they will have been nominated by people in their communities, people who have benefited from them and who will be, you know, glad and happy and thrilled that the person they feel has done something to improve their lives has got an award and recognition for it. Interestingly, though, these ordinary, in quotes, don't get the knighthoods. They don't get the damehoods. They're not in a position, it would appear, to be honoured enough. That tends to go for the people who are honoured. We see in some of the other newspapers that Tom will probably tell us about, who are already at a very high, you know, level in society and get boosted up a bit further.
Although it is important to stress that some of those people that are household names have come from very humble beginnings.
Oh, yeah.
And it is sometimes right to recognise those. But ultimately...
There's still time for some people, I suppose.
Exactly, and ultimately 3/4 of all honours are going to those sort of community activists, which I think is a very good thing. This is a much more muted honours list this year, not particularly politically contentious, give or take one or two different examples that I'm sure we'll move on to later. For example, the Mirror has on its has a big display about Ian Duncan Smith getting a knighthood, which will certainly rile up some people, but I'm not sure that it really should, because in many ways Ian Duncan Smith was one of the most misunderstood members of the Cameron cabinet in his real passion for trying to deliver a more just welfare system and for trying to get people out of the poverty traps that they live on. This was something that really drove his time in ministerial office.
And he famously resigned, did he not, when he realised that there was not enough money going in to support the system in its early stages?
Well, this is the point. When he set up universal credit, it was designed and it was supported by all parties. All parties signed up to this new settlement to get rid of the old system that was very broken, that almost everyone accepted was incredibly broken. And this new, more universal system was supposed to be much, much better, but George Osborne started to hack at it in different ways and politicise it, and that's what made Ian Duncan Smith resign.
What's interesting is that someone's been made a knight and you've had to spend a considerable amount of time there defending his reason to have that knighthood.
And also, why not make him a knight when it starts working better?
Exactly.
Well, he's someone that works continuously. This isn't just about universal credit. This is about his continual work in terms of setting up the Centre for Social Justice, a think tank that works tirelessly to deliver a greater realm of social justice in this country. And it's right that that is recognised. And actually, it's right that we view Ian Duncan Smith in a different way than he's been caricatured by some of the more left-wing journalists over the last few years.
Let's
Well,
take
it's
a look
been
at this.
caricatured as that way by the people who've been on the end of the benefit cuts, which, regardless of whether or not it was George Osborne who sorted out some of the funding or slashed the funding, he was in charge of the department that was imposing this change. And therefore, it was his responsibility as Minister, as Secretary of State, to ensure that change was done efficiently and effectively and in a way that saved money for the taxpayer. Those things didn't happen. And if universal credit, which did need to happen, was done properly, then I don't think anybody would have much of a problem with him having a knighthood. But also, I tend to think that Harry Billings would be a better knight. If you want to give an honour to Ian Duncan Smith, who's already very wealthy and has already had lots of high profile and abilities and everything else, give him an MBE, give him a CBE, give him something, but it doesn't need to be a
We've finally
knight.
got the newspaper. I was going to move on to something else and then come back to it, but there we go, we're on it now.
Right.
One person that is not mentioned but has been talked about even on radio phone-ins is Mr Farage. Is there no knighthood for him?
I think that Number 10 viewed that as potentially too politically contentious at this time.
Offered privileges twice, he said in a Sunday Times interview.
He says lots of things.
Potentially, and I think at a moment when Boris Johnson is trying to bring the country together, we've sort of got past those fractious 3 years that have caused a lot of political division. We've accepted that Brexit's happening, but it has to happen in a way that brings people together, and perhaps elevating Nigel Farage at this moment in time would not be the wisest political move. But ultimately, this isn't all this Number 10's list of honours. A lot of this was drawn up by the last administration under Theresa May. These things take an enormous amount of time to go through all of the different people. So I'm not sure how much this Number 10 has influenced the list this year.
There's also a lot of due diligence done on people who are suggested for honours. So regardless of whether I were to say, if I were in a position to say, Tom, would you like to be a peer of the realm? Doesn't mean he's getting it, because he's going to have a lot of vetting before he can go through that process by a committee at the Cabinet Office. And interestingly, Number 10, or Cabinet Source, I think it was officially quoted, said that in September, Nigel Farage was not a fit and proper person for any kind of honour. That's a very specific use of words. It's a very specific phrase that says to me it's got something to do with perhaps some of the vetting process that might have been going into his back.
There's not many political appointments, it seems, in this to us on the face of it, or not the big names we talk about. So let's go to the celebrity and sporting names. Might explain some of the cricketers we've seen, if Theresa May's hand is in part of this. But Olivia Newton-John, Sir Elton John as well, two of the big names featured, certainly, on the list.
And important to note all the work that they've done for charitable causes. That tends to be the big driver in terms of the people that are being
AIDS in terms
here.
of Sir Elton John, and obviously Olivia Newton-John has had breast cancer, hasn't she, on a number of occasions.
Yeah, and she has done an enormous amount of work in terms of fundraising and awareness behind that cause. And all of these different more famous faces that The Sun picks up on here have had that charitable drive behind what they're doing, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to be recognised.
Any that you want to pick out? Sam Mendes as well, we see there.
Yeah, and there's lots of people there, who've done some amazing things. But a lot of it as well has been upgrades. People who've already had, say, one of the BEs getting another BE, or
Sir
stepping
Elton
up
John
a bit, Elton John getting a little kind of, cherry on the top. Yeah. It's very, like Tom was saying, it's a very cautious list.
Yes.
There's no one freshly being minted into the establishment here and going, hey, come in and join us in the House of Lords, you're one for us. It's people that are already where they are going to be after they've had the honours.
And what do we think about these honours now? I'm old enough to remember that John Major was the person who brought in the ordinary, as you put it, people, the unsung heroes of the community.
Well, that's
ultimately the tone of
that's what the honours system should be about. It should be about rising up rather than trying to create this sort of differentiated society. It should be about recognising the extraordinary among the ordinary.
That's why a knighthood should have to go, or a damehood should be going to the average person in the street who's done something extraordinary, as opposed to someone who's a career politician and done the kind of work that any politician in their position may have done.
Well, I think
if you had peers, for example, there's no sort of peerages here particularly, but if you had peers who were created, they were people's peers, and we do have some of them, if we had a section of the House of Lords that is given over to the people's peers, as opposed to people being ennobled by a politician, someone who is perhaps repaying favours or to donors or anything else, we'd all be a lot more impressed. And that happens on both sides of the political divide. If we could remove politics and remove the politicians from some of these honours, I think we'd all be a lot happier.
Well, I think one of the reasons why this might be a more cautious list at the moment is because we're about to undertake a big constitutional review of the role of the House of Lords, the Supreme Court, all of these different points that have been quite contentious in political debate over the last couple of years. There is going to be a broad-scale review of these things, and this might be why everything's being held back a little bit now in terms of looking forward to how these institutions will play out in the future.
OK.
Tory peers will be appointed when they need to get the law through the House of Lords.
Oh, ye of little faith, we will see, won't we? We'll see if there's more newspaper coverage at 11:30 on that as well, shall we? Meantime, let's go to the FT weekend section. Civil servants choking on their hot chocolate or their hot milk at this stage of the evening. Because there's talk of relocation for some of them, is there, with this article?
Well, it's not. They're suggesting that there would be some new government agencies set up in the north and they'll be seeding some jobs there, research agencies and so on. Dominic Cummings' WhatsApp priority, so WhatsApp account says, "Get Brexit done, then ARPA," a designated scientific research organisation. But that's more likely to be new jobs as opposed to moving jobs from Whitehall to somewhere else. They have done that in the past, and they've moved the DVLA to Swansea and so on. It does improve the economy in regional areas that need that work. But it's not normal Tory policy. It's state intervention. It's kind of subsidising local economies to some extent, and it wouldn't go down at all well in Whitehall to ask Sir Humphrey to move up to Northumberland. So it's not new jobs, and it's also we don't know how many jobs it might be.
Well, I think the crucial difference between this and what happened under Tony Blair was in the early 2000s, a lot of smaller agencies, as you say, the DVLA or sort of procurement arms of the civil service were moved out. So not the decision makers. It tended to be going for jobs rather than decisions. So you can say X thousand jobs created in this town or whatever. This government has a very different view of that. It's about creating, as you say, these new agencies and the headquarters of those agencies, not just the peripheral arm, not just the procurement arm. The headquarters of these agencies will not be in London, moving power out, not just jobs. And so it's not about the government creating jobs, it's about where decisions are made.
OK, I was going to say how will they all communicate, but I suppose in this day of... every
They'll all get on HS2 because it's the only way that London can talk to anybody else.
They may not have to meet. You never know.
Well, I mean...
let's move on, if you don't mind, to The Guardian. The dismemberment, if that's probably too strong a word, of the Labour Party continues. Brutal and hostile. Effectively, as Tom Watson, the former deputy leader of the party, suggesting he was forced out. Is that what you're reading of
Well,
this?
according to the interview, he's had death threats to the party that the party didn't tell him about, which would appear to be not the standard employment practices of any other organisation in the country. And one of the things he says here, which is perhaps the most eviscerating to me, is he says that the ultimate betrayal of working-class people is not to take power when you can. And those who would support the Labour Party or have traditionally will sort of say, well, this is where they've gone wrong. There's been an opportunity. You've had a long period of Tories in power. There's been many complaints about universal credit and other things that the working class have been affected by, or immigration, and they have not taken the opportunity to do something about it.
Yes, but the left,
That's the
left of the Labour Party has not been in power, even in opposition, since 1983.
Hasn't been in power of itself.
Well, exactly. That's the point I mean. But they've not been in charge of their own party since Michael Foot. So this is a long time coming for the left wing of the Labour Party.
What I think is most extraordinary about this admission, really, that this hard left tribe has driven out the deputy leader of the Labour Party, is it only makes an inside page in the Daily Mail and the front page of one newspaper. In normal times, this should be front page news almost everywhere, but it's just sort of come to be expected. Such is the vitriol and the horror, really, of the momentum mob within the Labour Party. It's something that we just come to accept. We see it online with the trolling. We see it in person in meetings in hustings during the general election. It's that sort of baying crowd mob mentality.
Well, it's not just that, is it? It's not just that. It's also simplistically that they believe in a different policy direction. It's not just...
Right, but there's a way that you can disagree in a civil manner, and you can have debates like human beings, like adults, or you can have this ferocious sort of attack dog politics, which is really what the left...
Well, that's kind of what Tom Watson is saying here, and that it's for the deputy leader of the Labour Party to say that almost effectively the Labour Party has betrayed working-class voters is stinging criticism of the sort that they're trying to frame the debate as to for the leadership that's coming in. They're trying to ensure that we start talking about whether you want moderate politics or not, as opposed to what form of Corbynism would you like.
Yeah.
OK. Plenty more still to come. I'm running over, as usual, including just how far-reaching is Britain's obesity problem. We'll discuss that pertinent and timely point, I guess, when we come back. Welcome Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me this evening, Susie Boniface and Tom Harwood. Welcome back to both of you. Let's go to electric cars, shall we, or electric car conversions, if I could put it that way.
Yeah, well, if you just look at the story that's on page 5 of the Times, it's got a fabulous Ferrari 308 GTE, a classic car. It's got a picture of Harry and Meghan in Prince Charles's converted electric Aston Martin after their wedding, pictures of Dev Patel and Ellie Goulding going, oh, my God, celebrities are all converting their gas-guzzling supercars because they're so good at being great. And actually, if you read into the copy, there are various companies that specialise in this kind of thing who aren't telling you who their clients are. So a lot of this is guesswork and a few trips through the cuttings library, saying that it is possible to do this for the price of up to about £726,000 per car. So there are some very famous and very rich people who are probably on this very short list of people who wish to convert, goodness knows, a Ford Mustang into being a milk float. But if you are rich enough and of the type of person who wants to own a Ford Mustang or any other kind of American muscle car or a Lamborghini, you want it to have that when you put your foot down. You want it to be the gas guzzler. It is the conspicuous consumption that is what part of the attraction, and you're not going to want it to go like that. It's just
well, we did a piece on this actually from LA earlier this week, and one classic car enthusiast did say it does ruin a good car, but there we are. But the point being, if you can make the batteries more sustainable, or the elements in batteries more sustainable, there's a big problem there still, isn't there, for electric cars?
There certainly is, and obviously you can add, a lot of electric cars now have artificial sounds that go along with them, just mainly for pedestrians, actually, because otherwise they're quite dangerous if they're just a silent thing creeping up on you. But, I mean, I don't know why this is such a big deal, really. Rich people use the awful amounts of money that they have to spend it on something silly and expensive. Okay. Fine. Big deal. Let's
talk about dieting instead, shall we? It's the waistline we're talking about, and specifically for women it's dangerous. And in fact, there's a figure here, 34... It's there somewhere, isn't it?
34 inches or above.
34 inches or above.
You're all gonna die!
Bad. OK, so there we are.
Interestingly, yesterday, I think it was, the Daily Mail had a front page showing Pippa Middleton as was on holiday in St Bart's in a bikini a year after having had a baby without a single spare ounce of flesh upon her finely, beautifully toned physique, which made me want to just punch the wall with fury. And the next day, it's, by the way, people in our kind of age group who read, when I say our group, the Daily Mail readers, women aged 55 to 64, in the 45 to 54 age group, people who have too big a waistline, you're all going to die, you're all going to get cancer. These are problems. We do have an obesity problem. But the timing of this, we've got Pippa Middleton's perfect torso.
Oh, no, we're heading into New Year
Then we
diets,
have the waistlines, and then next week, I bet you any money, the Daily Mail is going to have a buy the paper every day for a week. We've got an amazing new diet plan. Have a body like
you've
Pippa.
Been in newspapers too long.
I hope that they don't then pursue sort of nannying government policies in terms of trying to tax anything that tastes nice or all of this sort of stuff. It's got to... I think far too often we rely on dodgy stats that actually don't really stack up all that much.
Does that take to the story inside the paper as well, which says dry January could buy you a holiday?
Oh, this one is ridiculous. This one is about...
It can buy you a holiday if you're an alcoholic.
Not buying any alcohol, i.e. saving about 40 quid a week, I think is their calculation, for 4 weeks, allows you to then save that money and spend it on a holiday. I mean, it's hardly a story, really.
Of course it does. And the issue of people who drink too much isn't that they're drinking out in pubs, it's that they're drinking at home when it's cheaper than that, and they're not going to save enough for a holiday.
We'll see you at 11:30. Thank you, Tom and Susie. Top stories are next.